where do you put communication in terms of quality?
I think it's at the top. I think that you need to have an open line of communication with your reservations department. Guest services needs to know what's going on, especially your owner relations team, those client success managers. The more information you can share with that team, the better suited they will be to have those intelligent conversations with owners and to be proactive, rather than reactive. If you have an owner that's concerned about revenue, I love looking at booking reports and sending the team, look how many times this unit just booked, or look at this reservation that came in for October. Send this to your owner. When they know that you're monitoring their revenue that closely, I think it puts them at ease.
Welcome to RevLabs by PriceLabs.
Hey everybody, Kyle here with PriceLabs, RevLabs, and I am happy today for our Life of Revenue Manager series to be joined by Nicki Blankenship. Nicki is a revenue management expert that's been in the field for a very long time with us. She's got a lot of great connections, a lot of wonderful history. She's experienced some things that none of us have, and she's experienced things that we've all experienced. So Nicki, thank you so much for joining me today. If you don't mind, take a second and just explain yourself to the audience and what your history's like, and what you think about the revenue management field in general.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I actually left a career in healthcare to join the vacation rental industry, and it's been about 11 years now. I started as the director of guest services for a local company in the Panhandle. We had around 1,600 properties, but I was in the director of guest services role for about a year, and then I transitioned to owner relations. At that time, there were no pricing tools out there. So we did the static pricing by season, set it and forget it. But the owner relations team was in charge of that at the time. And then I dabbled in business development during that time as well. And then a few years later, we decided that we were going to launch dynamic pricing, and we created a revenue team with that company. And I happily joined that team and found that I really enjoyed doing revenue management, all the levers that I could pull, seeing the changes take place and what it could produce for results. So I stayed on that team for quite a while. And then the company that I worked for was acquired by a larger company that had properties all over the US. And so I actually joined their team as their director of revenue. And I had several markets during the time that I was there. When I started, I had Hawaii, New Mexico, Tennessee, Alabama, and the Florida Panhandle. And then that slowly transitioned to Tennessee, Alabama, and the entire Florida market, which was an eye-opener for me because I quickly realized that seasonality was different depending on what part of the state that you're in. I helped with the Carolinas a little bit, but it was good. I got a taste of different markets, their trends, their seasonality, kind of how things work in other areas. I was able to see different pricing tools, different PMS systems. So it was a good experience. And then I left that role in November of 2023 and went to work as the director of revenue for a resort in the Panhandle. And then in October of 2024, I was brought on as the director of revenue for the hotel that's within the resort as well. So that's where I am now, and that's what I've been doing since November of 2023.
That's amazing. And correct me if I'm wrong, you're currently responsible for thousands of units when it comes to like actual pricing and getting the bookings in there for it. And that's a lot to handle at one time, that's for sure.
Yeah, so my current portfolio is about 1,100 properties that are vacation rental inventory, individually owned. And then the hotel is 250 rooms.
That's a 250 room hotel is a lot. It is a lot of fun to me, but anybody that's listening to this knows that you've got a lot on your plate right now. It's interesting. I didn't realize that you had your hands in Hawaii when we had talked before. What was your
Yeah.
experience like over there, and with it being so different from the Southeast United States?
Well, first of all, I wanted to go to Hawaii. I was like, I definitely need a trip to this market. That
Every
did
revenue manager
not.
needs to go to visit market,
Yes,
especially if you have them pricing in Hawaii.
yes, that did not happen. But there was a time difference, so our meetings were I would get calls and meeting requests that were after hours, which was fine. It was just an adjustment. Everything I had to think about the time zones that everyone was in and keep it straight. Um, but it's a very different market out there, and the comps that they use are um, a lot different as well. And the prices, the ADRs that they were seeing in that market were a little crazy too. So, and then I had just transitioned out of that market right before the fires.
Hmm.
And so, they saw a lot of changes during that time. A lot of our inventory went out of order. Um, but it was interesting to see in the ADRs that they could see, and their seasonality was different as well. So, but yeah, it was very cool, very good experience.
Yeah, and in those locations that you've priced down in the Southeast, so whether it's in the Destin area, or if it's up in the Smokies or over in the Outer Banks or wherever it's at, where's been a spot that you've really found that you enjoy doing that job? Is there, or I guess I shouldn't even say hopefully you enjoy doing it everywhere, but is there a spot that you just found like that was really, really interesting to you that you enjoyed diving into?
The Panhandle is home. That's where I live. It's what I'm the most familiar with. Um, but even along the Panhandle, all of those markets are so different with their booking windows, the rates that you can bring in, um, length of stay, everything is different. I think when you're, talking from Gulf Shores, Alabama, all the way to Panama City, and even though it's the same beach, same water, but it's, just different demographics and everything is just so different. Um, the 30A market and the Destin markets are probably my favorite, but I
Hmm.
don't discriminate. I like them all. But I do think that can be the most fun. And you tend to get the higher ADRs in those markets too.
Hmm.
But yeah, I think it's just knowing your individual markets, and even going from Destin to Panama City Beach, it's night and day with
Absolutely is.
ADRs, the inventory that's out there and available. Panama City has so many of those high-rise condos and
Hmm.
just thousands and thousands of units. And they've seen some issues over the years with spring break and how that's impacted their March and April revenue. And so I think knowing your market, knowing what's going on, but then also getting a little creative. I have some thoughts for friends in the PCB market that have reached out and thinking about March and April already of next year,
Hmm.
and trying to kind of be creative to drive some revenue in those months when they may be down.
Well, don't tease me. I would appreciate some of these tips as well. I work with people in the Panhandle.
I think one of the things that I've learned at the resort that I'm in, it's interesting because for years, actually, until right before I started there in 2023, they actually operated as a hotel.
Mhm.
Even though the units were individually owned, decor was different, bedding was different. They rented by unit type, and they had kind of like a rotation system where they would filter reservations. Um, and it's definitely a very, very unique property. And while we've moved away from that a little bit, we've still kept a lot of that hotel mentality and some of the benefits of doing that.
Mhm.
But one of the things that is very heavy with the resort where I currently am is group business. So the group market, which is not, it's not really a thing in a lot of the vacation rental markets,
Yeah.
at least in the Panhandle. And, you know, you may not be able to do it on that level that what we see at the resort, especially because you have meeting space and catering and all of those things, and most vacation rental companies don't have those with the properties that they manage. But even reaching out to the convention centers, if they don't have lodging attached, reaching out to those cheerleading competitions that are going to be in town, any of the sporting events over at Frank Brown, but just trying to build relationships with them, and even offering, a discounted rental rate for a group of rooms in a certain complex where you have heavy inventory. I think that extending snowbird rates, obviously charging a higher rate in March than you would in January or February, but extending those stays out and letting those snowbirds stay for the full month of March, if that's what they're interested in doing. And then at least, you have, a reliable, responsible guest in your property and guaranteed revenue, where you're not risking those shorter stays with people that might be coming into town just for that spring break experience. It might be a long shot with the snowbirds if they're a little concerned about previous years and the ongoings during that time. But I definitely think it's worth a shot to extend those rates and see if you can capture some revenue that way as well.
I think those are two really great ideas to kind of add on to the group bookings. It's not something that's discussed that much. I know there's a lot of revenue managers and property management companies out there that are looking to get those groups. I worked with somebody named Victoria in Steamboat Springs, Colorado, that was so good at working with those groups, and the amount of revenue that was added to the bottom line for that company was insane. Now, revenue management was a huge deal. We had rates in the right lane, but being able to get that big lift is so huge. So I would definitely, even if you're not in a beach market, hit for those group bookings as much as possible, if at all possible.
Absolutely. No, we have an entire team that's devoted to group sales, but we also have a food and beverage department and catering and conference services, and we have tons of meeting space available. So it's the whole package. So they definitely have their work cut out for them when they try to drive those leads and bring in that revenue. But if we took that away, it would be a huge chunk of our revenue production. We're still higher with transient sales, but group does play a very, very large role in our success every year.
That's awesome.
And then it's a balancing act, because, you want to give groups a great rate, but then, we're doing this thing where we're not setting and forgetting our rates anymore. And so if they're online and shopping and it's a week before their arrival, maybe you've discounted a few units, it gets a little tricky there. It's definitely a balancing act on a daily basis.
Yeah. So real quick to recap a little bit of what you said earlier. You've worked with strictly STRs in an STR environment, pricing them that way using dynamic pricing tools. You're now working in more of a hotel type of a system that functions a little bit more like that. You mentioned that there were some benefits to doing it in that hotel realm. What are some of the benefits that you kind of see? And the one thing that kind of stuck out to me is I was like, I bet it's a lot easier for you all to manage your owners' expectations in that sense. Is that one of those benefits that you see? And then what are some of the other ones as well?
Yeah, so when I started in November of 2023, they had just launched individual unit selling on their website. Coming from the vacation rental industry, I assumed that if we were going to sell individually, that we were also going to price individually. And that was not a consideration. It wasn't something that, anyone had said, oh, we should price these like this, because it just wasn't a part of that hotel mentality. When I looked into trying to launch that, I quickly found out that the pricing tool that we currently have is not capable of pricing individually, but our PMS is also not capable of pricing individually. So we ran into some roadblocks there. We are launching a new PMS, hopefully in September, fingers crossed. Nothing like launching a new system right after season. but we'll also be integrating with a new pricing tool at that time as well. It'll still be a little bit different than individual pricing, but we'll have some more capabilities. So as far as the owner expectations, it is a little bit easier, but there's been a change for them as well because they were so used to having that rotation. And whether their unit was recently updated and beautiful and they've put the money into it, or maybe it needs a little bit of love, they haven't updated it in 20 years, they were still clearing the same revenue because of that rotation system.
Mhm.
And so now there's kind of that push for we're showing pictures of your individual property. It's not just a standard unit anymore. This is what's being put out there and what's representing your property. So we have been able to get some owners to make some updates, put some money back in. But at the same time, because guests can choose their unit and we're not doing that rotation system, there are some owners that have revenue concerns. And with the way that we're pricing right now, it is difficult to really maximize revenue for those owners that have the updated units. They're sleeping the maximum occupancy. While on the other end, I can't necessarily drop rates too much because it impacts other units as well. So again, it's that balancing act. But one of the cool things that we're able to do with the systems that we're in is that, for Airbnb, VRBO, Marriott Homes and Villas, we send out individual units for those. But for OTAs like Expedia, Booking.com, we are selling by unit type. So we kind of have the best of both worlds because we get that vacation rental customer that's on VRBO and they're looking at the condos, but we also get that hotel customer that's online shopping, looking for, a room for 1 or 2 nights. And so we do see significant production from Expedia and from Booking.com, and even from Wyndham. Partnering with them and selling in that way. So it is a little bit different, and it makes, we can fill gaps, we can move things around. Those guests have no idea what unit, number they booked. So it gives us a little bit of leeway there. Yeah. It's a bit of a nightmare when it comes to controlling inventory because when you book by unit type, it doesn't recognize straight line availability. So it might say, oh, you have 2 units on this night and 3 the next night. So you're good to go. We'll sell 2 units for a 2-night stay, but they're not necessarily the same unit that's available every night. So I am glued to my my computer during high occupancy times, and I'm constantly opening inventory, closing it. There's a cancellation, I'm reopening it. So it does make it a little bit difficult. And if there is a PMS out there that allows you to sell individually and by unit type, and it is seamless and understands, I would be all for hearing that pitch because it would make my life much, much easier. But we could very easily switch to individual units on Booking.com and Expedia, but the revenue that we receive from that hotel consumer it works. And so we've chosen to leave that in place.
That's something that you don't hear a lot about, having it set up that way, which makes sense why first PMS that can build this out is going to probably have a call with Nicki. But it's so interesting to hear that because thinking about it, the person that's looking for a hotel, they're not necessarily looking for, the updated drapes and, like the types of bedding and stuff like that. So whereas somebody that's looking short-term rental, they're going to be more specific about the unit. So
absolutely.
That's really interesting. That's kind of got me thinking a little bit about things.
And we don't push all of our inventory to Expedia. We typically do like the smaller studios, 1 bedrooms. Sometimes we'll have a few 2 bedrooms on there. We recently switched our channel provider for Booking.com, and so we did push more inventory than what we've had on there in the past. But yeah, we're selective with what what we put on which platform.
I want to go back a little bit earlier too, and you've talked about so much that you've experienced and some of the hurdles that you've got going on right now. We talked a little bit about communication super early, and I just kind of want to get your take on that because you've been in every position possible, like being that guest communication, being owner relations, being in revenue management. Where do you think communication kind of ranks in the role of a revenue manager? And specifically, you're a director, so yours is highly important because you're talking up here, you're talking down here, everywhere. But for somebody that's just a revenue manager or just in the revenue management field, where do you put communication in terms of quality?
I think it's at the top. I think that you need to have an open line of communication with your reservations department. Guest services needs to know what's going on, especially your owner relations team, those client success managers. The more information you can share with that team, the better suited they will be to have those intelligent conversations with owners and to be proactive, rather than reactive. If you have an owner that's concerned about revenue, I love looking at booking reports and sending the team, look how many times this unit just booked, or look at this reservation that came in for October, send this to your owner. When they know that you're monitoring their revenue that closely, I think it puts them at ease. Mm-hmm. I don't typically have conversations with owners just because there are so many of them that I don't know that I would get anything else done. But if there's a serious situation where someone is wanting to leave over revenue, I think sometimes it warrants that. But being prepared for those conversations, using owner reports, whether it's from your pricing tool or you're using key data, whatever it might be, but going into that meeting and showing that you've done your homework and you know what you're talking about. And sometimes it's just setting realistic expectations based on what the market's doing, and maybe doing a reforecast and showing them how you plan to get there, and then just providing those updates. But I am in so many Teams chats all the time, and they're on my cell phone, they're on my computer, they go to my watch. Yep. But we're really driving revenue right now for the month of June, which is a little crazy, but our booking window is extremely small. So I'm in a group chat with our reservations department, and they send over screenshots of all of the revenue that they're booking in the month for the month. Mm-hmm. And it's just a way that we can kind of pump them up, show them support. But it's also a forum for me to communicate changes that I'm making with them. If I'm launching a promo, if I'm adjusting a promo, if I have particular units or a complex that needs some love, just to kind of give them an area to focus on. But I think that having those conversations with all of your departments and making sure that people know what's going on, so that they can get on the phone and have a conversation and they're not hearing it from an owner, mm-hmm. And it just puts them in a better spot.
Yeah,
to set those expectations.
I 100% agree with you. You mentioned booking windows kind of shortened up a little bit. Can we do a hypothetical situation real quick? Like, sure. I'm gonna put you on the spot.
Okay.
Let's say we're in June. Your July is down pretty significantly. How are you going to communicate to your team the levers that you're pulling? How are you going to communicate to your guests as well? How do you get that word out when you identify something, you're going through your reports, hey, I'm 10-15% down, it's time to pull those rates back. How are you getting that information not only to your internal team, but to those guests?
Sure. So one of the things that we do, I have a revenue meeting. Well, I have two every week, one for the hotel, one for the resort. But we run through, it's very structured. We have a meeting agenda. I have like a 22 slide revenue deck that we go through every week. But we always look at pacing for the upcoming months and how that looks. And then at that time, when we run through those numbers and I say, hey, we're significantly off pace for whatever month, I think we need to start making some adjustments. And then I give them I call it my 2025 plan. And I just let them know what I'm doing for each month, whether it's adjusting a minimum length of stay. Sometimes I'll try that before I'll drop rates, or looking at turn days or whatever it might be. But that's kind of where I give them my game plan and what I'm doing behind the scenes to try to drive that revenue. And then when I do my notes for the following week's meeting, I know what I did the previous week, and I can kind of look at the impact that it's had at that time. But you definitely have to look ahead and start making those decisions in advance so that you don't get to July and think, oh God, what are we going to do now? Because then a lot of times it's too late. And even though the booking window is small, you still want to capture as much as you can in advance. So if we're going to do some sort of flash promo, or we're going to feature certain units, that's that communication with your marketing department. And we have representatives from all of the departments that play a role in revenue and guest sales, and everyone's represented on that revenue call. So every week we get together. It's an hour, sometimes an hour and 15 minutes, but everyone knows what's going on. And then during that time, I try not to brainstorm with marketing on those calls, because then we would be on for 3 hours. So try to have those conversations separately, but working hand in hand with them and saying, hey, July looks good, but here's this week where we're really off pace. Let's try to do something for this week. And even if it's a promo that you already have going, but just pushing it out with an emphasis on those dates, or if you have particular units that are struggling. I know we have a summer promo they're doing an e-blast for, I think the end of this week. And I said, hey, can we add some featured units to that email? Because I know it's going to get the clicks. So let's go ahead and put some units that are struggling for July on there. Or if it's August that you're seeing a dip, which right now, actually August is seeing a dip for me right now. So, which is not surprising given our booking windows and our top search dates right now with the here and now. But just making sure that you're communicating with the marketing department as well. And then if you have, Airbnb, VRBO, if you want to run something through them or participate in the campaigns through Expedia, your placement, goes up there. So I always try to make sure that I'm communicating that to all of our departments, especially our reservations team, so that when those reservations roll in, they know exactly what's going on and how to set those up.
That's awesome. I kind of got back to that, how important communication is
Yes.
to everything. So we're kind of getting towards the end of this. I do want to hit one last thing though, and I want to give you a chance to kind of talk about, you said you've been in the industry for about 11 years or so. What's your biggest win that you've gotten? There's got to be one. I think every revenue manager has that, like that couple of bookings or that one listing that you saved or whatever. What's your big win?
There thankfully have been quite a few over the years. But I think there are two. One, when we first launched a pricing tool, and the internal resistance, we're not talking owners. We did have resistance from the owners and all of that, but we had a lot of resistance from our internal employees, especially the owner relations managers, and getting them on board and trying to tell them why this was the right move and why we should get away from static pricing. But I think that the increase in revenue that we saw after that first year, and we didn't cheat. This wasn't like post-COVID where everyone got higher rates.
Yeah.
This was pre-COVID. But there was no arguing the difference that it made. And I remember having a 3-bedroom unit on 30A where we had 50 other units that were identical. The only difference was the decor that the owners tried to put in them. And very high-end condos. And I had one that it just wouldn't book. But when we launched it on dynamic pricing and I was able to lower the rate for that property, it actually ended up exceeding some of the other units that had typically booked very well, even with the lower rate. So I think that was a big win. And then obviously post COVID, it was kind of to the point where we would joke. I would call our general manager and I'm like, I'm raising rates for this property again. And he was like, no one is going to book that at that rate. And I was like, well, let's just see what would happen. And people would. They were coming in and we would just keep raising the rates and the reservations just kept coming in. So, you know, that was a boost, I think, for everyone at that time. It was fun. It was, you know, getting in there every day, seeing which units booked and then raising rates even more. And so that was definitely a highlight. You know, and then I think now I've learned so much since joining the resort and the hotel. I know that a lot of the short-term revenue management is kind of modeled off of the hotel revenue management. But it really is so different. When I started there, they were like, okay, you need to send out the STAR report. And they wrote STR. And I was like, short-term rentals? I wasn't familiar with the STAR report. Now I wait every Tuesday afternoon, it's released. And I'm like the first one logging in, trying to see what everything looks like. But I think that's kind of a win too. It's just kind of expanding my skill set and the things that I'm learning. And I mean, even today, I constantly ask questions. Group sales was, that was a big one for me. I was not familiar with it. They wanted, you know, MAR rates. And I was like, what is a MAR rate? You know, so it's a different mentality.
What is a MAR rate?
It is the lowest rate that you are willing to accept for a certain time frame of the year. You know, and that actually kind of went out the window a little bit with dynamic pricing because they're constantly fluctuating. So I'm like, we can't just give like a $200 rate for March and April. Like we have to, we have to tailor that a little bit. So not as focused on the MAR rates anymore, more individualized quotes for group sales, depending on their rooms needed, number of nights that they're staying, and then their food and beverage and meeting cost. So, but yeah, I think that's definitely been a win, and I'm still developing, still learning. But yeah, it was very scary at first.
It is getting in there and learning a new thing and then learning it one way and having to kind of step back and say, hey, I don't have the same tools to work with. It's a little bit of a different process. I still want to be able to do some of that stuff that I thought about, but now I got to figure out how to do it. It's just, like you said, building out your skill set and going to make you better down the line.
I've gotten very good with Excel, pivot tables. I'm your girl for all things Excel.
That's awesome. Well, Nicki, it's been fantastic chatting with you. Thank you so much for joining me today. Hopefully we'll have you back on later down the line as well. And good luck with everything that you've got going on. Hope to see you soon in the 30A area. I'll be down there eventually and find you and take you out for coffee or something like that. So
perfect. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Have a great day and thank you so much.
You too. Bye, Kyle.